Welcome to toy-polloi. No Legos were harmed in the making of this video.
Hello, welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now today we are going to take a look at restoring a vintage Zartan and Swamp Skier from G.I.Joe, or as it was known here in the UK, Action Force. Now this is a UK version of the toy. The American G.I.Joe version has different stickers, but it's essentially otherwise the same. So I'm going to be restoring this to make it look like the British version, which is the one I remember having as a child. Now as you can see here, I have lots and lots of parts for the Swamp Skier and a couple of Zartans. I picked up some job lots of bits off eBay quite recently. I think I have enough for about 2 Swamp Skiers here and 2 figures, so that is what we're going to work on. Now obviously it's all pretty filthy. If I just hold up a few pieces here, you can see these are very dirty. Everything I bought is in this sort of condition, pretty grimy. So the first thing we need to do is give everything a good wash. So I'm going to do that just using some hot soapy water. Even the figures I've got are in a pretty sort of dirty state. As you can see, this poor Zartan has lost the hood on his head. In fact, I do have the hood, it's just come unglued. And the other Zartan I have here has a broken groin. You can see the front part is snapped off. So I think I'm going to try and work out a way to just repair that. And most of the Swamp Skier has the sort of common issues that I've seen other people moaning about or sort of talking about. Little bits broken. You see these front skis. This one has the sort of back little peg broken off. I've got another set of those skis somewhere which has the entire peg assembly sort of missing. And then of course it is the handlebars that snap. So I'll see if I can work out a way to repair those. But first thing is, let's get all of these into separate components and then give them a good wash. So this is probably the most complete Swamp Skier I have. It seems to have most elements to it, but there's a few bits broken. You can see these front handlebars are in the wrong way round and have snapped. So I want to just take everything apart before we clean it. The front skis you have to rotate round so they're facing backwards, and then you can pull those out. And that is the little tab that is often broken off just because of the way these are constructed. I think most children didn't think that they had to turn them around and would just try and pull them out, and that's what snapped it. And then everything else just sort of unclips with a little bit of sort of rotating and gentle pulling in the right directions. If you pull too hard, I think everything will snap because it's made out of incredibly thin sort of bits of plastic. So we're just going to pull all of these apart. Now with the handlebars, I don't want to sort of break these any more than they are sort of currently broken. So I'm going to use a screwdriver and to push the clips from the back so that I can get them out without snapping them anymore. And you can see actually the broken little tab is still in there, and I want to get that out as well. So again, screwdriver from the back. I should just be able to push on that. I'm hoping that will just pop out. It's not actually going as easy as I thought. Well, it is coming out, I can see it. There we go. Because I don't want to lose that tiny little piece. I think that's going to be quite important. So I'm going to put that aside and just make sure I don't lose it. I think I have another one of those in this front sort of top section of the Swamp Skier. So again, I'm going to push that out and just keep hold of it because that should become useful in the future. So here we are, this is the rest of the Swamp Skier, all very dirty. Let's go and give it a good wash and then we can start restoring it. Cleaning all those parts ended up taking quite a long time just because there are so many little bits and they're so sort of intricate that the dirt gets in all sorts of nooks and crannies. So it did take me quite a long time to clean those out. And I wasn't too worried about the stickers that were on the sort of top section of the Swamp Skier because I intend to replace those, and the ones that were on there were in pretty bad condition. So I just submerged everything in the water when I was washing it. Now while we're waiting for all those pieces to dry, I thought we'd get started on repairing these 2 Zartans that I have, because as you can see they both have issues. The first Zartan Zartan is missing his hood, which just sort of fallen off, and has a little bit of paint wear to his face and also all over his hands and boots. And the other Zartan I have here, the hat is actually in place on this one, but the front section of his groin has snapped off, and I want to replace that. It also has a bit of paint damage. You can see there's quite a lot of wear on the hands there and on the boots. So the first thing we need to do is to take both of these apart. I'm also guessing actually that the O-rings are going to be pretty battered and worn inside. You can see there, yeah, they're looking pretty rough. It's quite perished, so we'll replace both the O-rings as well. Now, to get the figure apart, I've heard a few people say that these are pretty awkward figures because although it looks like they're screwed, which is just a screw at the back, the actual body section don't want to come apart. So let's work out a way of getting these figures apart. First up, I will take the screw out of the back, like so. And with normal figures, you'd expect them just to come apart, but these ones seem to be sort of extra well held together. There's a lot more sort of bits inside it. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to take off his legs, because again the legs should come apart. So just unscrew those. I'm hoping these do come apart, because then we can take the pelvis off. Just put a screwdriver or something in here. Yeah, look, the legs do come apart, so that's good. So it means I can take one leg off. I'll do the same on this side. We can take that off, which means we can now get the pelvis off just by rotating this the metal sort of pelvis joint. And that's that off. We've still got the elastic inside. So yes, these are incredibly complicated things to get apart. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do at the moment. I'm just going to have a little think and see how I can get this top torso section apart. Right, well, I've been having a good look at this, and I have to say, it's not often I say this, but it's got me stumped. The whole of the body is held together so incredibly well. I don't want to sort of damage it. You could try and cut some of the inner sort of fixings, but that is going to really quite damage the figure. So what I'm going to do is another method. This one obviously still has the O-ring in place. So what I've done is I've tied a piece of elastic to the O-ring, and I'm now going to cut the old O-ring and make sure the piece of elastic is sort of nice and neatly sort of held onto the old piece, because then I should be able to pull this bit of elastic through, and we're going to use that at a later date. So this is a real test of sort of ideas at the moment. I don't know if this will work, but let's give it a go. So I'm going to hold one end of the old O-ring, the bit that I want to pull through, and I'm now going to cut this so everything should ping off. There we go. So I've still got hold of the other end of the bit of the O-ring, and my piece of elastic is tied to the other side, so I'm hoping I should just be able to pull this through like so. And I have, and I've now got a bit of elastic that's through the old body, because I think trying to thread some elastic through there once the O-ring is gone is going to be quite hard work. I think you possibly could do it, but it's certainly going to be easier if you do it this way. So for the moment, I'm just going to tie these two ends together, because I don't want it to get lost inside the body while I do some repairs to the other parts of this figure. So I'm just going to tie a little knot there. So we have a temporary piece of elastic inside the Zartan body, and we'll try and fix that later on. In the meantime, I've got to repair this pelvis, which is broken. I've taken the other Zartan apart just so that I can use that as a guide to work out the bit of plastic that I need to make. And we're going to do that using some milliput and a piece of paperclip. As you can see here, this is a little piece of paperclip which I've sort of roughly bent to be about the right shape. And to attach this paperclip into the old pelvis, I'm going to be using a pin vise. So I've got a little pin vise here with the right size drill bit, and I'm going to very carefully drill a hole into the pelvis. And the reason we're using paperclip is because the milliput needs something to sort of be held in place with, and to give it a little bit of a sort of a support structure underneath. If you just make it out of milliput on its own, it's very brittle, but putting a bit of metal inside it should give it the strength it needs and some sort of support, a bit like reinforced concrete. So we're just going to drill a little hole into the pelvis. Luckily this part of the pelvis is quite thick plastic, so there's plenty of area to drill into. So we can do that, and then we'll get my little piece of paper clip We can just put that in place and sort of shape it until we get something that we think is about the right shape. And then I'm going to glue that in just with a bit of super glue, and we can start constructing the milliput on top of that. So there we go, that's just a little bit of metal which is going to be sort of the understructure for the milliput. I'm going to put a little dab of super glue on that and we'll let that go off, and then we can start constructing on top of that to make this replacement sort of pelvis section. I've mixed up a small amount of milliput. This is the yellow grey stuff. The colour doesn't actually matter because obviously we've got to paint this in the end. And I'm now going to slowly sort of sculpt this onto the little bit of paper clip that we've got there. And I've got my guide here just so I can work out what the shape needs to be. And this will just be a very sort of little slow process of just slowly sculpting this on. It shouldn't take too long to do, I would have hoped. And the great thing with milliput is you can sort of roughly shape it and then use water to sort of smooth it down. So I'm going to blend this in as best I can to the original shape of the groin. But it doesn't matter too much because luckily this is a sort of fairly hidden area, but obviously we want it to look as close as we possibly can. So I'm just going to start by roughly sculpting a shape just with my fingers, and then we'll let it set for a little while and smooth it down with some water. I did a little bit more work off camera because this is actually sort of fairly fine work that you need to do with a good clear vision, and unfortunately having the camera in the way makes it quite hard work. But you can see there I managed to shape something that looks pretty reasonable. Using the water to sort of smooth stuff down is a really sort of good trick to know, and you can see that does match in all the sort of angles that we need, and it's just about thin enough. I've made it slightly thicker on the front just because I don't want the milliput to be too weak, but I reckon that will do the job quite nicely. So now you've just got to be patient and we're going to let that set. It takes about 24 hours to go off. Then we can just give that a little bit of a coat of paint and match it as best we can to the colour, and then start putting this figure back together. So we'll get on with some other jobs while that is drying. The milliput has now had time to dry, and you can see that that has dried really quite nicely, and it's a very firm fix. So what we've got to do now is paint it, and I'm going to be using Humbrol paints. I have a whole selection here because I'm going to mix everything together to make the right colour. I've got some RC423 and some number 70, and mixing those two together gives you about the right sort of shade of purple that the pelvis is made from. But I've also mixed in a little bit of 21 and 22, which is black and white, just to sort of give it a little bit of an extra tone. And 21 and 22 also a gloss finish, which helps because you can see that the plastic is not really matte, but it's not really gloss either. So mixing that in should give it a little bit of a sheen. So I've mixed this already. You can see here, mixed the colours, and it's just a case of doing this by eye. And once you've sort of got a mix that you're happy with, you can then start applying it. You can see that's a fairly reasonable match. I'm pretty pleased with the sort of shading of that. By the time it's dry and everything's in place, I don't think you'll notice that that is painted. So just get this bit painted, and then we'll also touch up the other bits of paint damage on the figures. And this is going to take a couple of coats because the yellow will sort of shine through. So I'll do one coat, let it dry, and then we'll come back and do another coat. Make sure that it's fully sort of blended in. But you can see immediately that's looking really good. So that's the first coat done. We'll let that dry, and in the meantime I'm just going to clean my brush. I've got some water there. I can start working on the black areas of Zartan. Now for this, again, it's neither a matte nor a gloss finish, so I've got two shades of black here. I've got 21 and 33, and that 21 is a gloss and 33 is a matte. So if I mix those two together in equal amounts, I will get a finish that sort of matches the original paint. So just carefully mix those together, and then I'm going to do all of the areas. It's mainly going to be the hands and the feet on this figure, because those seem to be the areas that get most worn. But it does make quite a big difference once you touch the paint up on these. So there's one hand done. I've got all the rest to do, including the boots, which also have some wear on. But really Zartan is only going to be black paint. He's got a little bit of a paint rub on his face there, so I might just touch that up as well while I've got the brush out, but it's so minor you probably won't notice it. I'll get all the rest of this painted, do a second coat on the pelvis, and then we can start putting this guy back together. We are now ready to start putting these Zartans back together. As you can see, I've got all the bits lined up. This is the painted pelvis. The match is not quite perfect. It's a little bit purple, but I think once it's all in place, you will hardly notice that, especially once the legs are in place and there's a bit of shadows on it. I could go back and repaint that a slightly dark colour, which I might do in future, but for now, that is perfectly good enough. So let's start by putting this more awkward figure back together, because this Zartan really just needs a little bit of glue on it. So we'll start with this one. Now this is where the bit of elastic comes into play that I threaded through earlier. Now I was lucky that I already had an O-ring in this one, so I was able to use that to get this thread through the sort of hole and over the peg inside. Now if you don't have an O-ring in place, I will show you in the next episode how you can go about threading something through the body of this Zartan figure. But for now, let's get on with this one. So I bought some 2mm round elastic, and this is what we're going to use to put the whole figure back together. So I've got a length of it here. I've got white at the moment just so it's easier for you to see on camera, but ideally you'd want to use black, although when it's all together you won't actually see the elastic anyway. So what we're going to do is we'll take the thread that we put through Zartan's body, and I'm going to cut that just with a pair of plastic nippers, and I'm going to tie one end of that to the new piece of elastic, and then I can pull this through the figure. So I'm just going to quickly tie that, and we'll get that elastic threaded through the body. So there we have it, it's tied on. I did that off camera because this is quite fiddly to do with the camera in a way, and I can now pull the other end of the elastic, and we can pull this new piece of elastic through the body like so. It's easy when you know how. So I've now got a thicker bit of elastic through the body, and this is what we're going to use instead of an O-ring. Now we need to hook the elastic onto the hook that holds the legs together, so I can just pass this piece of elastic through the pelvis. And we can hook that on and then start pulling that through. You want to keep a bit of tension on this because it does have a tendency to unhook at this stage. And now if I start pulling the elastic taut, you'll see that the body is pulled together. So what you've got to do now is pull the elastic very tightly and tie a knot, and that will then hold everything together. So I'm going to basically tie a simple knot like so, and then just keep pulling on it and keep pulling on it, keep pulling on it. You can see that the legs are now starting to get quite taut onto the body, and once you've got it sort of tight enough and you think there's enough tension there, tie a second knot. So I do that now. That's feeling pretty good. And now what you've got to do is trim the ends of these bits of elastic off. Don't trim them too short, because if the knot comes undone, that will be terrible. So leave them a little bit long, and these can be pushed up inside of Zartan's body. So I'm just going to trim them quite long like that. So you can see that they are a bit longer than needed, and I can just push those inside and they will ping up into his body. And there we have a Zartan all back together. With the other Zartan I have, it's just the hood that has come undone, and you can see clearly on the back of the head, if I get onto the focus, there's just a bit of glue in a slot there, and it should have a similar bit on the back there. So I'm just going to drop a little bit of super glue into this, and we'll push the hat on. That should glue nicely in place. Just give it a few minutes to set. So let's just put a little bit of super glue there. Like so. Then we can push this hat on. And we'll just hold that in place for a few minutes, and then that will be firmly held. And here we have my two Zartans. They're both looking quite nice now. I'm still missing a couple of bits. This guy doesn't have one of his leg armours, and I don't have any of the accessories for the one on the left. But this was the one I didn't really expect to be able to fix because he was so sort of battered. But you can see that groin area looks pretty reasonable. The colour match is not perfect, but by the time you got sort of shadows and stuff on it, you really wouldn't notice that that had been replaced with a piece of milliput and paper clips. So it certainly does the job. And this is the one that I really hope to display on the Swamp Skier once I'm all done. So he's going to be sort of laying down. You won't see it anyway. So that's it for part one of this Zartan and Swamp Skier restoration. Join me in part two when I will get to grips on the Swamp Skier itself, and I'll also show you how to fix the O-ring issue if you don't have the O-ring in place on the Zartan. So hope that's been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
That's very helpful, Muffin. Thank you.